Welcome back to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio, hosted by Patrick Morrissey, Chief Marketing Officer at Altify. Revenue Optimization Radio is brought to you by Altify, the sales transformation company, where we believe the only way to unlock sustained growth is to deliver predictable revenue. Delivering insights, thought leadership, and the best practice on how to improve sales velocity. From the one man, maybe the only man who knows how to do all of that, at least this morning, Patrick Morrissey. Hey, Patrick.
So good morning, good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to another edition of the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about, some revenue realities and really the intersection of sales and marketing alignment, a topic that everybody's got an opinion on. Having seen the film up close and personally, both as a CMO and as a sales leader, I know it's a little bit more nuanced than sometimes we give it credit for. And the good news is we've got an expert to actually talk into the details about what this looks like. I'm pleased to welcome Lance Walter. Lance is the CMO of Neo4j. Lance, welcome to the program.
Hey, Pat, thanks. It's great to be talking with you and great to be featured on the podcast.
Hey, before we get into the weeds and start talking trash about our friends in sales, give us a little bit of background, Lance, on your career, as well as tell us what we need to know about Neo4j to level set the conversation.
On me, I came out of a relatively technical background. I actually have a computer science minor from Berkeley and started my career as a tech support engineer, and thankfully realized that at some point fairly early on that a lot of the skills that I was using in technical support in terms of trying to communicate with customers, understand technology, that I happened to start at Oracle, was really relevant to what product marketing was doing. And when I went to my first startup, watching the product marketing people who were, launching the new version of the system and talking with analysts and doing competitive research and training salespeople, it just was so glamorous and so sexy to me. And I basically threw my name in the hat and was lucky that they had the conversation with me. Moved into product marketing, grew up there. You and I worked together at Business Objects early in mid-2000s. And it was right about then that I then jumped into full-time head of marketing roles and have run marketing for a handful of startups since then. In terms of Neo4j, where I am now, I've been here for coming up on a year and a half. Cool company, not as well known in the Bay Area as it should be, but as much as there's talk and always has been around the Valley about category creation, and we all know those founding CEOs who dream of one day that there's a Gartner Magic Quadrant that's a category that they created, and there's only one dot in the quadrant, and it's their company. Yep. As much as we've all heard those fantasies, very few people actually pull it off despite the dream. And I'm really pleased to say and feel very fortunate that I'm at a company called Neo4j that is in fact doing that. We invented a technology category called graph databases. It's a database architecture that was built to really put a focus on connections and relationships between people and processes and digital systems and mobile devices. It's really about delivering value from understanding how all of those different pieces are interconnected, as opposed to kind of your traditional data warehousing analytics kind of slice and dice use case. So we are the clear and front leader in the graph category. You can validate that with Gartner, Forrester, or any number of third-party sites, and we're having a good time kind of preaching the gospel of graph, trying to help people understand that this isn't the right choice for any and every application and any and every piece of data that you want to manage. But there are some places where people run out of steam with other approaches, could be relational, could be NoSQL, and we help them find their graph epiphany, help them understand a different way to approach analyzing and understanding connected data. And we've built a pretty healthy business on top of that now, more than 1,000 customers, 300 in the enterprise, which is our focus, and growing every day and coming across some pleasant surprises, like Gartner just put graph databases in their top 10 tech trends for 2019. So if Gartner's waking up to it, that tells me that the market's waking up to it and that we've got some pretty exciting times ahead of us in the coming years.
Absolutely. So, and I didn't even know that I needed a graph database epiphany. So I'm about to have one, which is awesome. Gartner's having it. The market's having it. You're in a growth phase of the company, moving this up and to the right. And it actually, just pulling apart your description and your background, hits on a number of different things that I think inform the headline topic here around sales and marketing alignment. Because that's one of those things that sounds good on TV, but in real life can oftentimes get pretty messy. And if I look at your background, where you've had both early stage companies, growth stage companies, you've had marketing leadership roles at publicly traded companies. So you've seen this film at all phases. And if you look at the current phase that you're in now, where you're both creating a category, evangelizing the new and the art of the possible, that means you need arguably a higher class of both salespeople and marketing people. If you're going to be the evangelist and setting the vision and setting the industry agenda and then turning that into dollars and cents, that's a pretty high bar, frankly. So give me your perspective on the good news and bad news under the broad umbrella of sales and marketing alignment in actual practice, generating revenue. How should we think about that problem?
You're absolutely right that it varies across phases, and the Neo4j phase is a pretty interesting one in that I would consider us kind of early mainstream. So we're about 250 employees, growing to over 300 this year, have about 150 million in most recent round led by Morgan Stanley. And we're sort of past the, is there product market fit? We're definitely past the, hey, are we a solution looking for a problem? We've checked that box and we have a repeatable sales motion. Now it's how you grow from here. And one of the things that gets interesting in terms of aligning marketing and sales at this point is hiring profile for salespeople. Because on the one hand, you want people who have experience. They know how to talk to the enterprise. They know how to get complex deals that get done in large organizations, managing through procurement and multiple stakeholders and all of those kinds of things. And what we find is that you can cherry pick some really solid people who come out of companies like Oracle and SAP, who have great sales instincts and a lot of discipline. At the same time, if they're coming in with the expectation that they've got a brand like Oracle or SAP behind them, or a machine like SAP or Oracle supporting them, you're going to have a pretty disappointed sales rep pretty early on. And so for us, the sort of sales and marketing alignment starts in the hiring process of getting people who have the right profile of an enterprise selling motion, but are ready to get in and tell you, hey, I know you've never heard of my company. I know you haven't heard of my category. I'm willing to invest the time to educate you and show you what other customers are doing. And like you said, or like we often say around here, hopefully help you get to a graph epiphany, something that sparks your curiosity to say, let's find out more about what this could do for us.
So you've earned your stripes, come up through the ranks, and actually coming out of a background with having some real technical depth, I think is, for some of the things that you've marketed, has been helpful too. But when you're coaching and onboarding folks on your team, what is your guidance about how they should be interacting with the peers in sales? And where do you see these things really resonate? And where do you see this go off the rails quickly?
It's a great question. I think there's lots of pieces to it. So one is, especially at a startup, there will be a point certainly where companies like Neo4j and Altify outgrow this. But for the size that we're at right now, where we're talking a sales team that can be counted in the dozens, not hundreds, marketing team likewise can be counted in the dozens, not hundreds. I really try and encourage people to build strong relationships all the way kind of up and down the food chain and across. So it's not just, hey, there's a good relationship between marketing leader and sales leader. Yeah, that's absolutely important. But field marketing managers working with field reps. And the other piece is that shouldn't be a level by level stratification. I was on 2 calls earlier today, internal calls, just talking with sales reps about some of the kinds of things that they need. So I think a lot of the alignment too is making sure that those connections aren't sort of level specific, but they're kind of up and down across the marketing and sales organization.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. Let me be a little bit more directed in the question, insofar as, somebody who owns the marketing function now, but as a recovering CRO and a former sales leader, I say with the utmost respect that salespeople as a general rule exist to ask for things that they don't really need. How do you actually broker the conversation, or when you're sitting down with your peer running sales, to understand what are the gotta haves versus what are the nice to haves?
You hit on a really key piece there, which is I was sort of raised in the school that sales is marketing's customer. And so I encourage all of my teams to think of it that way. Where it can get a little bit tricky is that's not the same as saying sales is our boss. So you want to be informed by what are the needs in the southeastern region, or the rep who's carrying the telco vertical. What does he or she really need to their 2019 numbers, and hopefully high five you at President's Club and all of that good stuff. But it is being really careful to say, hey, we want to listen and get the input and know that sales feels heard. At the same time, we're accountable for world-class marketing. We have to deliver the program that help the company get to its goals. So I think a lot of it is making sure that reps feel listened to and heard, and that they know their marketing team is not suffering from either ignorance or apathy, meaning they don't know what our challenges are, or they know and don't care. You got to be able to check both of those boxes. And in my experience, if they feel like you know what the challenges are because you listened and you care about them, even if you can't address all of them in the next minute or in the next month, that they're going to be okay with that. And it's also, as you said, salespeople, I love them. I feed my kids because salespeople hit their numbers. You're absolutely right that one of the things that you see happen is a salesperson's input will often be a reaction to their most recent win or loss. So they won a deal, they're all excited, and they go, oh my God, we got to go all in on this vertical. Or they lost the deal and they say, hey, we need to clear the decks and focus entirely on this one competitor who knocked me out of this one deal. One of the things that I have found is a good sort of moderating function there, or sort of a buffer, is to work with pre-sales, because they're involved in so many different transactions, and they're not always reacting to the last particular win or loss. They tend to hear those common themes, common frustrations, common excitement points from the sales team, and you can use that as a check against the passionate flamer email that came in from the sales rep that says we have to do this, or we have to stop doing this. You take that input, but then you hold it up against, okay, how does this fit in the mainstream of what your field engineers, your pre-sales people are experiencing? And I found that has been a great way to figure out what's a nice to have, what's an urgent reaction to a tactical situation, and what's stuff that we can do that will make multiple reps likely to be more successful.
I found the same thing. And also I find that the pre-sales feedback that you get oftentimes does not have nearly the same level of emotion or hyperbole or some of the other urgency, and that might be more deal specific, and it's a good calibration point. Juxtapose that, because we've all been on the wrong end, and I can tell you I've been guilty of sending a few of those emails to my partners in marketing as well. That's one thing. It's another thing to think about, or what's the reality check there about how do you serve those up to have the right kind of conversation with your peer in sales? Because if that's not going well, then that tends to, in my experience, metastasize in some very unhealthy ways in an executive meeting or in a board meeting about, hey, why we aren't hitting our revenue marks. That somehow decomposes into, if marketing just gave me more stuff or more leads, we'd have this problem fixed, or we'd be having a different conversation this quarter.
Yeah, well, I would say marketing frequently has an advantage on sales, and some of it is time, some of it is access to systems, some of it is supporting resources on the team, but marketing is typically in a better situation, at least than an individual sales rep, to bring a lot of data to the table. And that has been really helpful, not so much in the category of, hey, I've got a mountain of evidence that your idea is a bad one, but more to come at the conversation from the perspective of, hey, I want to help you. You and I have the same goal, which is to get you to President's Club and to help the company hit our ARR growth targets. But I've got some data that would suggest that time and energy might be better spent elsewhere. And if you bring the data to the table and you start with, and you can land the point and get the sales reps trust that you want them to succeed, and that their input matters, I found that you can definitely steer the conversation towards, hey, let's do something in your territory that's going to make a difference, but let's change from the original passionate request that was, again, a reaction to a breakfast event you went to from another vendor or something like that, and into what do we think is really going to make you successful and fill your pipeline in the next 2 to 3 quarters. The other one that I think is really, really important is measurement of marketing versus sales. And I do hear multiple people talk about this, but I still see it go wrong in lots and lots of environments. And it gets down to, marketing has no lack of instrumentation in 2019, right? Even startups can have a tremendous level of visibility. Sometimes it feels like you're sitting in the cockpit of the space shuttle, and there's so many knobs and indicators and things that you can look at and measure, and they're important. You got to realize, first of all, that not all of those are going to be relevant to sales or the rest of your executive team. Some of those are how you internally optimize marketing versus how you communicate the value you're delivering to sales and the value you're delivering to the company. And then the other is just in terms of that scorecard around pipeline of, are we giving sales what they need? Where I have seen it go very badly in, for example, the definition of things like MQLs. I think sales believes, and rightly so, that MQLs are an incredibly gameable metric. That marketing can give you, it can meet any MQL target you give it, as long as marketing has complete flexibility to play around with the definition of MQL. So what we have done in Neo4j in the time that I've been here, and it has helped a lot. I wouldn't suggest for a second that sales and marketing, that the relationship was broken, only that you're sort of never over-invested in that relationship. You can always keep improving. It's like, I've been married to my wife for close to 20 years. I'm still always looking for ways to make the relationship better for her and better for me. So in the same vein, we got into a conversation and said, hey, when we're looking at pipeline, let's stop talking about MQL. Let's start talking about sales accepted opportunities. And in Neo4j's case, that creates a pretty nice system of checks and balances where marketing has to say, this guy's engaged enough that we would call him a marketing qualified lead. He is worthy of a phone call in a fairly timely fashion from sales development. But then sales development, who in our case sits outside of marketing, says, all right, well, I'm going to take a look at who this person is and what company she's from and those sorts of things, as well as their activity. I'm going to prioritize that for a call. And eventually, if that call goes well and we qualify them, we would create a sales opportunity. And we have an extra step in Neo4j where the rep and the rep's manager both basically have to say, yup, there's a sellable conversation here. It's not a guaranteed win, but there's definitely a sellable conversation here. And when we focus on measuring marketing's output around those things, that's when we get deep trust from sales on a couple of fronts. One is they know that we care about what's actually relevant to them, which is those sellable conversations, not MQLs. And the other is it suddenly changes the entire nature of the MQL conversation, because we can bring sales in and talk about how we define marketing qualified leads, but we start that conversation by saying, hey guys, this isn't about anybody's comp plan. Nobody in marketing gets paid a nickel or a dollar for every MQL, and it's not our measurement of did marketing do a good job or not. It's simply a leading indicator. We're not going to get 100 deals out of 10 MQLs. It's a way to prioritize SDR activity. That's really the big one, is we should create a definition of an MQL that lets us say, leads that behave in this way are the ones that we want to fast track to the front of the queue. And then the last thing is, it is a bit of a marketing metric, but it's a marketing metric that says, hey, are we continuously calibrating that we are triggering enough engagement from this lead that they make it to a certain baseline bar that we would call an MQL that says that they deserve a call from sales. But it makes the whole conversation around what behaviors would lead us to prioritize lead A over lead B, as opposed to anybody feeling like marketing's trying to engineer a scorecard by which they can't fail, and sales is just in there fighting back against that, so that they don't end up with marketing celebrating massive pipeline creation while sales is missing numbers and feeling like they don't have anybody to talk to.
100% agree. And that's a good place to pause for a second to pay the bills, and then I want to pick up that conversation right off the back of the break.
You're only as successful as your customers, and that demands the need for an exceptional sales execution, revenue retention, and customer success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams, however, is that their sales process just doesn't match how their customers buy. Sustained growth isn't possible because the revenue team isn't aligned with customers and prospects. With Altify's sales transformation solutions, companies can deliver predictable revenue growth. Yes, we said predictable revenue growth. They can also acquire and retain customers, and they can collaborate across the revenue team to qualify and win new business while delivering value that unlocks cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps salespeople, managers, and executives achieve sustained revenue growth. They help accelerate sales performance for Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Healthcare. They can do the same for you. Visit Altify.com, just like it sounds, Altify, Altify.com.
So welcome back, everybody. We're talking to Lance Walter, and he is the CMO of Neo4j, and he just went into a very explicit example of really where there's an opportunity to build the relationship, or the analogy you're using around your marriage, I think is an apt one, Lance, in terms of trying to further align sales and marketing against the right kind of outcomes, and making sure that there's a shared vision. Or I think where you were really going to is really at the highest level, is there a common framework around how sales and marketing are able to generate results, or maybe more importantly, step back and measure success and look for opportunities for improvement? And then when you think about that, in a shifting gears slightly for a second, in terms of how you're bringing people on your team and how you're coaching them across the organization, in terms of the entire organization is really part of the extended revenue team and is focused on customers and focused on delivering, what would you say is critically important in terms of both the setting the expectation as well as driving the right kind of behaviors in the organization to get to those customer wins and the right kind of outcome in a way that everybody can see that sales and marketing are aligned?
On the setting the expectation, that takes kind of hard forms and soft forms, in the sense that the hard form would be, okay, what's our target for sales accepted opportunities? Let's make sure. I don't think sales will ever feel like that marketing is as numbers accountable as they are. And I think that's probably fair, right? Sales is absolutely all about quota achievement. And while marketing is measured on numbers, marketing is measured on others that are non-numerical. So there's the hard piece of, we have a target that we have faith in, that is a meaningful output from marketing that sales sees value in, and so we're measuring on the same scorecard. The softer stuff is that listening and trying to gather and understand what sales wants, and back to that conversation about the internal customer. And one of the other mistakes I see made, and one of the places where I coach my team, is absolutely, let's listen, let's get the input. I will say Neo4j as a company, we're a graph database company. We're about connections and data. One of our core values is that relationships matter. And we mean people-to-people relationships. Yeah. We always want to be listening to sales. The thing we got to be careful of is that we can't be sitting there as order takers committing to every ask, but rather I'm gathering the input. I'm gathering requests from multiple territories across multiple industries. I'm talking to the SDRs as well. I'm using pre-sales as kind of the information integrator that you touched on in the prior segment, Pat, and that's going to inform what we come back to and tell you, hey, here are the things that we're going to commit to. And I'll give you a crisp example where a fairly small thing can generate a lot of goodwill between marketing and sales. So we brought a new sales rep on in the Southeastern region, and I had a conversation with him, and he said, look, my region tends to be quite SAP heavy because I have a lot of manufacturing here. And we have all kinds of great case studies about cool use cases and what people are doing from Neo4j, but whether it was that we didn't include them or we happen to be talking to the wrong companies, I don't have any proof point around SAP that I can shift to a lot of the SAP customers in my territory and say, hey, look what other SAP users are doing. And it was a pretty easy way to come back and say, hey, for content and case studies, first of all, let's make sure we're especially tuning our radar for anybody who might be in the pipeline who's using SAP data to feed their graph powered by Neo4j. And the good news is we're now 2 weeks away from delivering that. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for the rep, but a good way to understand what is specific need in a territory and how do you adjust the rest of the team to give that rep something of value. And, that rep's got 10 other things that he's asked for that he's not going to get. But the fact that we delivered this one specifically because of his request, and we wouldn't have done it if it was a completely obscure use case or system or that kind of thing. We probably wouldn't have done it because it wasn't high leverage. But we sell in the enterprise. We'll find SAP in the enterprise. There's every reason to believe that this thing's got legs beyond our Southeastern region, but it sent a real strong signal to the Southeastern region rep and his management that we're listening and reacting and responding so that we can give them what they need to advance the conversations that they get in.
Yeah, and you make a good point, particularly around the leverage piece, that one, you're being directed and helping a rep in a particular territory, but also that the investment there is replicatable beyond the particular territory into a common use case that everybody's going to be able to use and take advantage of. That goes back to one of the points you were making earlier, which is really, hey, salespeople need to be heard. Sales leaders need to be heard. That's one of the core things that I suspect comes back to what you would describe as a priority on listening.
I think absolute priority on listening. And this is one where most of our habits in Silicon Valley especially are pretty bad. We'll tend, if you and I are having a conversation and you're expressing some needs to me, Pat, as a sales leader or as a sales rep, our natural tendency, we move so fast to do things like, got it, yep, okay, cool, yep, makes sense, right. It's like these quick, punchy little, I'm sort of telling you that my ears are still open and I'm still aware that you're talking. And to me, that is a very different thing than making sure that somebody knows that you're listening. I'm a huge believer in active listening. It takes a little more energy than kind of the classic back and forth, but basically to say, I'm going to listen to this rep express what they want. And instead of devoting my energies to explaining, hey, that event didn't work with, our natural tendency as humans is when somebody's asking us for something or posing something that's different from our plan, our natural tendency is while they're expressing their need or their perspective, we're formulating our counter argument. So we're queuing up but that event didn't work last year, or that vendor has let us down, or we don't have budget to do it in Q3, but we could look at it in Q4, all of those sort of counter arguments. And if you put that aside, if you resist the temptation to get into that and really listen, then you have the opportunity to go back to that rep and say, okay, what I'm hearing from you is that your patch has a different industry mix than what we see across the rest of the US, that the most important system in your customer base happens to be SAP, and that you are sorely lacking for content around SAP. Did I get that right? And that's when you hear the rep's energy come up and they go, yes, you heard me. That's exactly what I'm asking for. And I would argue that half the battle is done, whether you can deliver that SAP case study in 6 weeks or not, because you can't always deliver it in 6 weeks. But when you play it back to them, when you paraphrase what they told you, that's when you get that deep signal of, yup, you listen to me, you know what I'm asking for. Whether you can deliver it tomorrow or not, it's a different thing, but at least you know what I want and why I want it.
Well, exactly. And I think that's probably a podcast in and of itself, and that's certainly way beyond just sales and marketing alignment. But I think at some level, we all just want to be heard. And whether or not you can help me is different from, you're hearing me and you're feeling me. So at least the signal got through the noise. And then if you can actually go the next step and deliver the case study, like the example you were using earlier, then you've just made another convert on the sales team in terms of really understanding the importance and the value of marketing.
It's scary to think about, but the average tenure of CMOs, especially in the Silicon Valley, is right around 1.5 years. And I believe that there are many of those situations where the sales and marketing relationship fell apart, in large part because that mutual understanding and that listening was missing, meaning that you could have had a scenario where all the numbers look the same, but the feeling from sales of marketing understands us, knows what we need, and cares, and is doing what they can to deliver it, versus marketing's just running their own game plan, or nobody listens to what I ask for. It all comes out of the ivory tower, and it doesn't seem to be connected with the reality realities of what's happening in my past, I genuinely believe there are lots of situations where the sales and marketing team would hold together under the same set of numbers if there was that trust that comes from listening and understanding.
And it also means you have to have lived it and walked in the shoes. And I'm curious, from in your current role now or in past lives, how much time you spent out in the field or out in front of customers?
One of the biggest, honestly, disappointments about the marketing executive career path is that I have found that I am less desired on sales calls the further up I go, meaning that when I was a product manager and I drove the roadmap and I was a subject matter expert on a particular product, man, sales would take me out all day and I could talk with customers and do things. And then when I moved into product marketing, my dance card wasn't quite as full, but people felt like, hey, I'm talking to somebody who has some subject matter expertise on the market, who knows the competitive landscape, who's probably pretty familiar with what other customers are doing with this kind of technology. And you keep moving it up, advancing up the food chain and such. And when you get to the point that you're a CMO, I think sometimes there's just sort of a stereotypical perception that you're a paid spokesperson, you're a propagandist, and you're not going to bring much value to the meeting except evangelizing how awesome you are and how great your category is and those kinds of things. So I am making every effort to get in front of customers and salespeople. And part of building that trust with sales is showing that, hey, I'm not an empty suit and I'm not just there to propagandize. And that's what's helping me get out there. But it is funny that it's a little counterintuitive that on the marketing level, the more senior you get, in some ways, the less attractive you are from a pure title perspective. You got to get past it and show that, hey, I can still be relevant at the point of sale. I can bring some value to your sales conversation, but it's differently than how I might have done it as a product manager or as a product marketer.
And the good news is if you were successful in doing that, then you can go home and go, yeah, I still got it.
Yes, and you can brag to your friends like Pat. And the other is, they're on a serious note, is that word gets around, yep. Right? If you bring some real value to a customer conversation, you've covered it on other podcasts, that great sales reps tend to take advantage of as many resources in the company as they can get. They'll leverage services in the right way. They'll leverage product management in the right way. They'll leverage marketing programs and content in the right way. And you set yourself up to be kind of called in the right situation. But it's through that sort of viral advertising that happens in sales once you've delivered some value in front of a customer.
And that's probably a good place to wrap up or try to get to the close, because ultimately, and you mentioned this earlier, very succinctly, saying, hey, I'm feeding my kids and putting them through school based on the performance of the sales team, and I'm a part of that. So when you think about your career, who's the best sales leader you've ever worked for, worked with, and what did you learn from them?
I've seen a few things, so I'm going to give you a couple answers there. One gentleman who I worked with just a couple of years ago, Gary Hanna, he was an 8-year Salesforce veteran, but he's been around selling enterprise software since the early 90s. And he was really, really exceptional from the perspective of a motivator who can really, really get the sales team to get excited to get out there. And I mean in a sustained way. I don't mean like he ran a great sales kickoff and everybody left feeling happy. I mean that day to day, week to week, we're doing this thing. We're winning business. We're building a company. I never saw a leader who could get reps as consistently motivated as that. And along with that, and I think some of that was his 8-year tenure at Salesforce, he brought a lot of discipline to process, playbook, how we documented in the system, a lot of religion that I wish more sales leaders had around the importance of those things. So I thought he was really good there. And then another one that I would mention is a guy named Tom Dibble. He was my head of sales when I was at software as a service billing company called Aria Systems. He was a great partner to marketing. I mean, I think we achieved kind of the ultimate in alignment in that he and I presented our board slides together. It was not your classic, here's marketing's view of the world where everything's great and there's tons of pipeline, and here's sales explaining why we missed the number and where all our challenges are. But it was us together co-presenting, and we actually would have one slide that presented everything from raw leads coming in the front of the funnel to closed business and new reference customers coming out the other side of the funnel. So it was very much I'm sort of arm in arm with Tom saying, here's what we did together as opposed to the departmental slices. And the last thing I'd say about Tom was, you want to pick the most complex deal out there. He was a guy who could always get them done. He was, there's 48 hours ticking on the clock of the quarter and a customer who's asking for something crazy. And how do we manage through that? Not do a bad deal, not set a customer up for success, but get a relationship going here and bring them on board. And I've never seen anybody who was as capable at it as Tom Dibble, who's now CEO at Aria.
When you're successful with that kind of skill set and you can deliver, then you get a promotion to the CEO and a whole different set of challenges. Hey, really appreciate the conversation today, Lance. And I think one of the overriding things that you hit on in a couple different ways, big and small, and really the focus of sales and marketing alignment is this notion of really actively listening and participating and making the sales rep not just feel like they had a chance to have their day in court, but they were actually heard, you understood the needs and the ability to drive that in a way that's going to turn into close one business. I appreciate the feedback and the time today. We should probably have a follow-up just on the whole listening conversation.
All right. Well, I'm up for it anytime. Pat, thanks to you and Altify for giving me a chance to talk on the podcast. I'm an active listener and love where you're going with it, so I will stay tuned.
Thanks much, Lance, and congrats to you and the entire Neo4j team. We look forward to continued success.
You've been listening to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio, brought to you by Altify, right here on the Funnel Radio Network for at-work listeners like you.